All right, welcome to class, everyone. We're going to continue to work through the Catechism. Today, we're going to be looking at Commandments 5, and then we'll see how far we get. There's a lot of stuff to talk about in the fifth commandment. We are going to be on page 14, right there. There's pencils over there if you want to be able to take notes on it. Okay. Before we jump in, does anyone have any questions, comments, or concerns? All right, as we talked about last time, let's review the fifth commandment. The fifth commandment is, I want you guys to read this with me. You shall not murder. What does this mean? We should fear and love God so that we do not hurt or harm our neighbor in his body, but help and support him in every physical need. So what we took a look at last time was that this is what God's ideal for us as his people is to be people of peace. That is, people who don't try to solve their problems or their issues with physical force, because that just ends up causing an endless cycle of violence and physical aggression. And not just that, but we actually want to go out of our way to help our neighbor in his body. So if we see him in need, we do our best to care for him. This is one of the truly unique things about Christianity. When Christianity first started, there's this excellent book, if any of you are readers at all or listen to audiobooks. The book, The Patient Ferment, is the name of it. And he details what was it about the Christian church, the Christian religion, that made it so appealing in the first couple of centuries. And it was because they did a really good job of caring for their neighbor. So in the Roman Empire, when a plague would go through, they didn't understand germs, but they did understand contagious diseases. And so if like a family member got the plague, they would basically chuck them out into the street so that they wouldn't get anyone else sick. The Christians would go and grab these people, bring them into their own homes, and nurse them back to health. And that fundamentally different way of looking at a human life changed so many people and brought so many people to the faith in the Lord Jesus. Beyond that, there was a fine Roman tradition of what's called exposing your children, which means that if you didn't want your child after they were born, you could simply just leave them outside and the child would die. This is basically an abortion after the child was born. Christians would go scoop up these kids and raise them and care for them. So those are two great historical examples. Obviously, you can see where in our own historical cultural context, how that has developed into things like, when they're done well, orphanages, adoption agencies, hospitals. All those things flow from a culture that has been deeply impacted by the gospel of Jesus Christ. Likewise, in our own lives, we should do our best to care for our neighbor. I know somebody's mother who just happened to walk by is excellent at this. Whenever anybody is sick, she is there to drop food off. That's a way that we can still care for people today. Okay. As promised, though, I do want to talk about something a little bit beyond that, and that is how this helps us understand human life. And this gets at kind of the underlying theology, underlying belief system that led those early Christians to take care of the poor and the sick and those abandoned children. It's the underlying belief that every human being is a person for whom Jesus died. Every single person has worth and value, period. That is our fundamental approach towards human life. So no matter what circumstance they find their life in, their life has value and worth. Because of this, we take a stance on two touchy modern issues. The first is abortion. The Christian church is 100% against the practice of abortion. This causes no small amount of heartburn amongst lots of people in our culture, especially those that are pro-choice, that are pro-abortion. They believe that because the pregnancy is something that's happening in the woman's body, the woman should have a right to say what happens to her body. This is kind of flowing from the American ideal of rights. We talked about this before, how the American religion, our God in America, is our rights, and how on either side of the aisle, the left has, which would be the more liberal side, their right to choose in terms of abortion, reproductive rights, that's their big thing. On the right, it's the right to bear arms, it's the Second Amendment. When we say that abortion should not be a thing, they filter it through their rights, and they say, well, you're just trying to control women's bodies. That's the only lens they have to think through that. Have you guys ever heard that before? As you talk to people about abortion or hear conversations about abortion. But for us, that's not what it's about. It's not about controlling women. It's about saying that life matters, period. Life has value no matter how small, right? That's what Dr. Seuss wrote in Horton Hears a Hoot. Go read the book. It's fantastic. No matter how small a person is, that's their life has value. And we believe that life begins at conception, which is when the two human gametes, sperm cell and the egg cell, meet inside the mother's womb, or even in a petri dish, which is a sad state of affairs now in modern society. But when that happens, a human life has created, and therefore that human life is our neighbor, and it needs, we need to support and care for our neighbor in all their physical needs. So I want to give you guys a really simple acronym to remember why this is, so if you're ever talking to someone about abortion, it all comes down to this simple way of thinking about it. And this can maybe help you think through it as well. There's this, it's an argument called trotting out the toddler. So Corey is a toddler, almost out of toddlerhood. She's about 4. So there is nothing different between me and Corey and me and an unborn child, except for 4 things. The first is size. I'm bigger than Corey. I'm bigger than an unborn child. That does not mean that that child in the womb is not any less of a human any more than we would say Corey is less than a human. So all this argument is about is helping people understand that that child in the womb is actually a human life, because that is what we have to argue. The next one, so if you just remember SLED, so size is the first one. The next one is level of development. I'm more physically developed than Corey. I'm more physically developed than an unborn child. This does not make the unborn child any less of a human being than Corey is less than a human being compared to me, because I'm more developed than them, right? You grant that? Yeah. The next is environment. Now this one's a little bit trickier, but not that much, because Corey and I basically have the same environment. We live in the same place. But still, just because the child is in the womb, because they are located in a different place, does not make them any less than a human being. And then finally, the level of dependence. There they are. Come on in, guys. The last one is level of dependence, or dependence. The Corey is more dependent upon her parents than I am, right? Yeah. I'm not really dependent upon my parents for anything. Corey is very dependent upon her parents. Not for everything, but for a lot of things, for most things in life. An unborn child is completely dependent upon, well, the child's mother for literally everything. So because of that, we still, again, would not say that the unborn child, or that Corey is less of a human being than me because she's more dependent, in the same way that the unborn child, just because the unborn child is more dependent, more dependent is less than a human being. So if you can remember again, remember SLED, which size, level of development, environment dependence. You can be able to convince people, you'd be able to at least not maybe convince them, but at least give them a good starting point to be thinking about whether that person in the womb actually is a human being. Because they don't believe that it is a human being. That's the only way that you can justify it. It's just a clump of cells that's part of the human body, or part of the mother's body. Okay? The next one is euthanasia. So euthanasia is the practice, we call it basically mercy killing. I mean, we do this a lot in farming communities where you put an animal down if they're suffering, right? You put them out of their suffering, out of their misery. This, though, is not a practice that should be done towards humans, because humans have, animal life is very precious and wonderful too, but there is something qualitatively different about human life, specifically because Jesus became a human. He didn't become a horse. The Son of God, that is. So the reason why euthanasia is bad is because it says that human life is only valuable when it has dignity. That means you're not like pooping your pants all the time. You're basically free from pain, generally. Everyone has a little bit of pain. So you guys get older, you will notice that your body hurts all the time. And then the third thing is you can basically do what you want. You're self-determined. Right? So if you are free from pain, you're dignified, and you're self-determinate, then you can be able to, that means your life is worth living. But according to what we've talked about so far, according to Scripture, what makes a life valuable? It's love, right? Life is valuable simply because it's love. If we put all these characteristics on another human being, or on the value of our own life, you're basically, we are saying that life is only valuable if it meets certain characteristics. And it's one thing to say that about my own life, but it's another thing entirely. It's actually a small thing. It's a small little leap to start applying this to other people's lives. And this leads to some pretty scary things that have happened in humanity, where if someone doesn't meet those characteristics, society will say this person's life isn't worth it. It isn't worth the resources, and it isn't worth living, and so the society kills that human being. And you might think to yourself, well, that's a horrible thing. What kind of monstrous society would do something like that? Ours did that back in the 1920s, where we wouldn't kill people, but we would chemically castrate people in our prison system so that they couldn't pass on and have children and make more either handicapped or people that are messed up. Even in our society as well, if a child is determined to have Down syndrome before they're born, in America, you want to guess what percentage of those children are aborted? I know this is the wrong thing to say to you. It's 80%. In most European countries, it's closer to 100. So they've eradicated Down syndrome because they've eradicated all the children. This gets really nasty in other historical areas. Nazi Germany was a big practitioner of this. They did not believe a whole class of human beings were not worth living. Their lives weren't valuable anymore, and that was the elderly and the handicapped. If you want a good book, I know I've already recommended a book, but you guys are going to get another one. That I listened to it when I was driving out to Colorado with my brother for my aunt's funeral. We listened to the book on audio, and there was lots of times we were both weeping and making fun of each other for crying. Like, oh my God, you're crying. It's called Bright Valley of Love. It's the story of a home and a community for the disabled, mentally and physically, in Germany during the time when the Nazis rose to power. And it's a beautiful, beautiful story. But the Nazis didn't just start against the Jews. The first people that they went after and killed were the mentally handicapped and the elderly, because they said their lives were not worth living and they were a drain upon the resources of the nation. That's where the nationalist part of the Nazi power came in. Everything was to support the nation. So that being said, I mean, euthanasia is the thing. If someone's going to kill themselves, they're going to kill themselves. We can't stop them, but what we need to be careful of is that we are always saying that a life is valuable. A life is valuable, has value, simply because it's life, because it's human life. Any questions on euthanasia? Fun, cheery topics you guys came for this game. The last one is suicide, that I want to talk about with the fifth commandment. So suicide is a sin. You can tell a sin a lot of times. There's a couple ways to tell a sin. God's word is the most clearest definition. Obvious thing that there's a sin, but the real reason why we know suicide is a sin, at least the way that makes sense in my brain, is simply how harmful it is to everyone around you. So if a person commits suicide, it is one of the worst things that you could do to anyone who cares about you. And a person who commits suicide a lot of times has already convinced himself that no one cares about them and that everyone else would be better off without them. But it's not true. That's a lie straight from the pit of Satan. Suicide is very harmful, not just obviously to the person who commits suicide, but to everyone around them, because what they rob their loved ones of. Mental health is a part of the fifth commandment. We are in the midst of a mental health epidemic right now. Pretty much most people are anxious and depressed, and a whole variety of other things for any number of reasons. It probably goes beyond the purview of our discussion today to talk about why that is. I've got some good ideas for why that is. But the mental health is not, it's simply that your brain's not working right for it. There's no shame attached to it. I've shared plenty of times, and I shared once or twice in the pulpit that I myself I think it's been 10 years now since I was diagnosed with depression and anxiety disorders. I have mental illness in my family, and I've been struggling with mental illness, probably since high school. So even though I was only diagnosed 10 years ago, I've been struggling with it for a lot longer than that. There's nothing bad. You're not bad or wrong. If you're mentally ill, you're sick. You just gotta get help. So it's I think about it like this. Sometimes people think that it's a moral failing to be depressed or to be anxious or something like that. Like if they just had more faith. or were stronger, they could just work their way out of it. But I like to think of it like this. You broke your ankle. When your foot was hanging at the wrong angle, did anyone ever say to you, well, have you tried not having a broken ankle? Yeah, truly a supporting company thing, right? Why wouldn't anyone say that? Why wouldn't anyone say that, Phoenix? With his foot, he's got compound fracture. Someone says, well, just walk it off, Nancy. Well, it might be funny, but if someone said that in seriousness, well, it's insane, right? That's not how things work. You can't walk off a broken bone, plain and simple. You have to get it set. You have to get it treated. Mental illness is much the same way. It's a little bit more tricky because you can't see it, right? With your broken bone, there was a very obvious sign that things were not right in your body, right? Mental illness is much different in the fact that it's hidden the vast majority of the time. So I'll say this: if it's something that you struggle with, anxiety and depression, I know what it's like, having experienced it myself. Don't struggle alone. That's the worst thing that you can do, is struggling alone, trying to treat it alone, because usually what human beings do to treat those things alone is they're very damaging. Usually that's when things like alcohol get involved, because they try and numb themselves the pain, and that just makes things worse, let alone lots of other things. So yeah, don't suffer alone. We need to have compassion upon all those who are suffering with mental illness. Suicide's bad. It's a sin. It's harmful. Doesn't necessarily send someone to hell. Sometimes that thought's still out there. But that's about a couple 100-year-old view that's not in the scriptures. It doesn't automatically send them to heaven either. We have to look at what the person's faith was. Having experienced suicide in my own family and depression in my own life, I'll say this: Satan attacks and twists a person who's mentally ill in their own thinking. And so really, it's just that Satan was able to take them down and get them to do something horrible and damaging. Just because Satan gets at us doesn't mean that we are outside of the grace of God by any stretch of the imagination. It just means that we got hit too hard. We are saved by Jesus Christ through him alone, through his merits, through his works, not. And we believe that nothing can separate us from that, not even mental illness or suicide. So, yeah. Any questions about mental health or suicide or euthanasia or abortion? All right, let's move on to the sixth commandment. Okay, the sixth commandment is, say it with me, people, you shall not commit adultery. What does this mean? We should fear and love God so that we lead a sexually pure and decent life in what we say and do, and husband and wife love and honor each other. So this is one of those places where the Christian church is radically different than the rest of the world around us. Our world society right now has totally bought into the lie of the hippies that our sexual desires are simply an urge or a need, an itch that needs to be scratched, and so whenever we feel that urge, we should act upon it. God commands what he does for our good. We've talked a lot about that. That is true also of our sexual needs as well, and our sexual identity. So God wants what's best for us. He wants to protect us and safeguard us to share in a wonderful gift that he's given us. So we'll try and cover this pretty quick without beating this horse to death too hard. First thing is, we're going to talk about what sex is. This kind of gets at the whole transgenderism thing. Okay? Your sex is a huge part of your identity. And your sex is that you are either male or female. There are only two sexes. Gender is a societal construct that's not very helpful. You are either male or female. Now, the expression of that does not always have to look the same. So not every male has to have a big burly chest and a beard and grunt and fart and wear cowboy boots, right? They can even wear rabbit skin chukas with 2-inch heels, if they so choose. No, I mean, there can be men that are a little bit more sensitive, smaller, that sort of thing, slight, even a little bit more emotional. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. There's this variety that God created in us. Females, right? To be a female does not have to be wearing nothing but dresses into, tea parties and I don't know, whatever girls are into, bubble gums and stickers, I guess. Cute clothes and dressing up and makeup and all that sort of stuff. There again, there's a variety in there, but it is still important to recognize we are either male or female. And that those things don't change. That's built into our very chromosomes, our very DNA. Now, there probably will come a day when we're able to change that with technology. It seems like we're getting closer. But we're not there yet. So we'll cross that bridge when we get there, about what it looks like to mess with creation. Yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about. So with that, that's really only being done with unborn at this point. So you can alter the genetic makeup of your babies before they're born. Yeah, it's kind of a weird deal. Yeah. I don't know. I don't think they're doing it with humans yet. I don't think. I don't know. Are they? Hmm. So there is, I don't know if you have seen it, but they did manage to grow a human ear on the back of a mouse. You ever seen that? And that was even, that thing came out before AI was a thing, so we can actually believe that it's real. AI has kind of messed everything up now. We're not actually able to pay attention to anything. Yeah.
I just think it's weird how like boys that want to become girls, they end up together with girls that want to become boys. What do you get there?
Right. It's not a matter of attraction or other people. There are some people that have a fundamental disconnect between their biological sex and what they feel like. There's a deep set of confusion. I mean, their term for this is gender dysphoria. What they have to gain by it is a feeling of peace and being okay with themselves, because there's a deep feeling that they're not okay. Question is, are hormonal treatments and surgery a way to reach that peace? What the research, at least, and the research is very limited at this point because it hasn't been a thing for that long. The answer is no. The argument usually is we have to let these people transition from one, instead of presenting as their biological sex, they're presenting as the other sex. because if we don't, they'll kill themselves. What we find is that even after that, their rate of suicide is incredibly high still. So it doesn't seem to solve it. The research points out that most of these people, they eventually, and I'm not saying it, I don't mean for this to sound callous or cruel, they grow out of it. And giving them enough time and counseling and that sort of thing, and hard work, they can begin to identify with their biological sex and be okay with themselves. But I mean, if someone wasn't okay with themselves, we wouldn't allow them to operate like on themselves to fix it. It is less, the way that our society presents it as if it's the greatest thing in the world. And it's not. There are so many problems with a person starts doing hormonal treatments, let alone surgeries. That are there's complications when you start messing with the human body to that level. Yeah, it has little to do with their sexual attraction, Cole, right? So they might be biological, and this is where it gets confusing, right? They're biological male, they may be always and ever attracted to biological women. Or they might be attracted to biological males. If they transition and are and present as a female, as a woman, and they marry someone who is a woman who is presenting as a male, like, what is that? Is that heterosexuality? Is that homosexuality? Like, at a certain point, the tag that we put on it is not helpful. What we want to do is affirm the goodness of being male or female. We want to be patient and loving with those people that feel that deep sense of confusion in themselves, because the tendency in our society is basically to allow our genitalia to define our identity entirely. No, being male or female is a big part of our identity, but it's not the whole thing. As Christians, as disciples of Jesus, our identity is first and foremost in Jesus Christ. That's, I think, a big part of the answer, is we need to do less of defining our identity according to what we do with our genitalia and putting more of it on what do we do with our faith. And what is Christ calling us to do? How is he calling us to live? And recognizing again that even if we don't have peace in ourselves, that we have peace with God. And he says that despite our faults, despite our internal distress, we are okay. Because, I mean, truth be told, we can have internal distress about any number of things. Whether it's our physical appearance, from things we think we're a girl or we think we're a boy, to smaller things like, I got a big nose, I want to get changed or something like that. You know, just things like that. So yeah. Now we want to move on to the expression of our sexuality. So how do we express being male or female? According to the Christian faith, there are two ways only that we can express our sexuality. That is chastity or celibacy, that is being unmarried, or we express our sexuality within the protection of heterosexual marriage. Anything outside of that is no bueno. Is not what God intends for us. And whenever we do that, we invite chaos, we invite pain into our lives. Plain and simple. This isn't a guarantee that if you mess up, then your life will be an absolute disaster. But again, you're inviting all sorts of stress, heartache, and pain into your life if you don't follow God's design. Celibacy, we believe, is a supernatural gift. Human beings are not naturally celibate. So there are human beings out there that don't need romantic connection. I know several of them. And they're wonderful people that are able to use their lives and dedicate more of their lives to the work of Christ in the church. Not everyone's that way. Most people, the vast majority of people, because of the biological impulses that we have to get married. So, yeah, those are the only two options. Obviously, this, just real quick, this forbids things like pornography. Pornography is, you want to talk about a pandemic, something that is destroying men in our society is pornography. It is so easily accessible nowadays, and I'll just throw this out there. There's almost no cost too high, or there's no cost too high to get rid of that addiction, because it is addicting. So if you want to have a healthy, meaningful romantic relationship with a woman, you need to stop using pornography. People need to stop using pornography. And whatever that has, I am willing to help. There's no shame. There never needs to be shame in that kind of thing. We'll talk about more about this with confession and absolution. But we want to help people to be able to get out from under that. We believe also that homosexuality and homosexual acts are not in line with God's ideal. Divorce is also not God's ideal. God's ideal for a married couple is that they remain married and love each other and respect each other for their whole life. God's ideal is also not that they stay married and hate each other. Obviously, that's not what God wants. He wants them to live at peace with one another. Divorce and staying married and hating each other are basically two sides of the same coin. It's a false view of what marriage should look like. And then obviously premarital sex is out of there as well. Really kind of just like with the fifth commandment, with the sixth commandment, what we should look at is Jesus' own words from Matthew 5. And this helps us kind of, with the fifth commandment, we were saying that all life is sacred and special. Matthew chapter 5, verses 27 to 32, gives us the kind of underlying theology behind our position and why we say what we do. And this kind of flows from our view that all human life is valuable no matter what. Okay? So it's down there at the bottom. You guys see that? Nope. Okay. It says, you have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away, for it is better for you to lose one of your members than your whole body be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away, for it is better to lose one of your members than for your whole body to go into hell. So the problem here is when we're looking at, and this is, this can be for women looking at men as well with lustful intent in their hearts, is we are these other human beings. When we're looking at them with lustful intent, we are treating them as if they exist to meet our sexual needs. Right, to scratch that itch for us. But as we talked about, these human beings are people of incredible value, worth, and dignity, simply for two facts: that Jesus died for them, and second of all, that Jesus, the Son of God, became a human being. So because of that, those human lives have incredible value, no matter who they are. And what we want to avoid is, again, looking at these human beings as if they exist to meet our needs, which is also the kind of the foundation of a good Christian marriage, is recognizing that these people, our spouse, isn't there to fulfill me, but I'm there to serve them. So yeah, you can commit adultery as in like break this commandment even in marriage, if you still think that your spouse is there to meet your needs. If you still, I mean, because that's still possible, very possible. So we want to look at, always want to look at this other human being whom I'm attracted to, can most certainly be at the same time someone of value and worth and dignity that I don't need to lust after. That being said, there is plenty of time and space for saying, good job, God. I think we can say that as well. Like, we can just say that there are people that are attractive and beautiful. Not everyone is going to have the same aesthetic of beauty, the same view of beauty, but we've got to be very careful. It's very, very hard to do. Okay. Anything else about the sixth commandment? Because I think we're just about done there. There's just so much more that we could talk about there. But we won't. Okay, we'll call that quits for today. We will not have class next week.